Good morning. Good morning. Ella's all dressed up for you today in her fancy bandana. Say hi. We're ready to read our story. We have Sprinkles, the spider plant, who's here living at my house now, so don't worry. We'll water him. You ready to read? Yes. Okay, to your spot. Good girl. Okay, today, since it's Wednesday Show What You're Reading Day, I figured it would be a good day to read one of my favorites. It's called Miss Dorothy and her Bookmobile. And this is really cool because she basically makes her very own library to share with her community. And since we're going to do a lot of staying home and reading, I think it's a really good idea to find some books that you might like to read. Make a big, huge stack. Right? She can't read yet. Oh, forgot to tell you the author and the illustrator. This book is written by Gloria and illustrated by Susan Condi Lamb. And these are some of my favorite illustrations because they have so many beautiful details with the nature parts of the pages. When Dorothy was a young girl, she loved books and she loved people. So she decided that she would become a librarian. She would be in charge of a fine brick library, just like the one where she checked out books in the center of town square in her hometown in Massachusetts. That's not too far away from where we live. So she went to Radcliffe College, where she read almost all the books in the big school library. Then she went to library school, where she learned all the things a good librarian should know. Is that how you read, laying on the floor? Sometimes. Finally, one bright spring day, Dorothy graduated, ready to be a librarian, in a fine brick library just like the one in the center of the square in her hometown. Soon, however, Miss Dorothy fell in love and got married. Her new husband wanted to move to a farm in a land she had only seen on maps, but had read about in books. A land of high blue mountains with deep green valleys and cascading streams, splashing silver, shaded with oak, maple, and fir, at the base of high Mount Mitchell in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. She moved all the way out. The land was lovely there, and Miss Dorothy's garden grew lush and tall. Out in the fields, wildflowers bloomed red, yellow, blue, and gold. Inside her cozy house, Miss Dorothy read all the books on her shelves. Her new friends and neighbors brought their books to share, just as they shared vegetables from their beautiful gardens. But there was no library, and there was no place for Miss Dorothy to be a librarian. Then, one day, a meeting was called of all the friends who liked to read. "We need a library to store some books and check them out," Miss Dorothy said. Then, Dr. Masters, the eldest man in the community, spoke. "Once, we had a rolling library here," he said. "Dr. Wing over at the boys' school shared his books by placing them in every post office, church, and store. He took them from place to place, in wooden crates in an oxen wagon." "A library is a building with shelves and books and windows," Miss Dorothy said sadly. Mrs. Erickson, the music teacher, took off her hat and placed $1 into it. "This is to buy a bookmobile," she said. Everyone placed the money they had into the hat, and they all agreed that Miss Dorothy would be the librarian. They're coming up with a plan to share books in their community. Finally, the new green bookmobile arrived, and everyone turned out to watch as Miss Dorothy lifted the side panels and propped them on supports so the books were shaded from the sun and rain. Many of the people brought books to Miss Dorothy's house, and she stored them in her basement every day. She struggled up and down the steep staircase, her arms loaded with books to line the shelves of her bookmobile. That is pretty neat. She's working hard. And, sitting straight and tall, she drove the bookmobile over high hills and through narrow valleys, taking books into every schoolyard and to visit every farm, post office, grocery store, churchyard, and parking lot. She stopped at the Tar Heel mica mill, and she parked at the courthouse steps at lunchtime whenever court was in session. So she's going to all the places in her little town to get the people books. If her readers could not come to the bookmobile, Miss Dorothy took books to them. When elderly Mrs. Mommy had read all her books, she hung her husband's red flannel drawers on the line, and Miss Dorothy climbed the hill with more books to share with her reading friend. They had a little secret message, so she knew when she saw that red pajamas, she would walk all the way up there, even in the snow. Soon, everyone learned that Miss Dorothy would check out books wherever and whenever she happened to be in the middle of the North Toe River. The year the big rains made the rivers into oceans of mud, the embankments grew soft and slippery as she drove around the bend in the river road. Miss Dorothy and the bookmobile were slowly sliding into the rushing waters below. Miss Dorothy crawled out the window to cling to the side of the van until it came to rest on an island. I thought I would be a real librarian, she thought to herself, scraping mud from her skirt, in a fine brick library in the center of town, and just look at me now. Finally, a farmer on his tractor came down the road and saw the bookmobile. Miss Dorothy, he called, do you have books of poems I could borrow? As soon as you help me upright the van, she answered. When the bookmobile was back on its wheels, she opened the door, swept out the mud, straightened her hair, and with a smile, she said, the library is open for business. So she was having some tough times over here, but that didn't make her quit. She tried again. The students at Riverside School stood waiting in line, sun or rain, for the little green bookmobile to drive into the schoolyard, its wheels scattering stones at the side of the playground. They're so excited. That's like you guys at school. No one was more excited to see Miss Dorothy than one brown-eyed boy named Ben. He read every book about airplanes and every volume of great adventures Miss Dorothy could find him. One day, he told her, I will go see the world in those books for myself. Everywhere Miss Dorothy went, she made new friends reading. One of them was a girl named Barbara, who could not go to school. She spent her days in a wheelchair and had visited a hospital in Massachusetts, where she'd seen a fine brick library in the center of Miss Dorothy's hometown. Miss Dorothy brought her stacks and stacks and stacks of books. You read them faster than I can bring them, Miss Dorothy told her. But she was smiling the broad smile of a happy librarian who enjoys nothing so much as sharing her books with her friends. One day, a reader donated a little white house to be used as a library. It will have to do, Dorothy sighed, remembering the fine brick library in her hometown. Everyone showed up to clean and paint until the new library was ready to open. The mothers baked cookies, the fathers cut firewood for the round black stove, students loaded the shelves with books. Mrs. Mommy sent her best lace tablecloth and silver punch bowl, and she offered Mrs. Mommy's red flannel drawers for the flagpole, too. It's their cute little library. It's like a little house. The years came and went. After a while, awards covered Mrs. Dorothy's walls, and people came from everywhere to visit her library and write articles about her and her readers in a land of the high blue mountains, with deep green valleys and cascading streams splashing silver. Miss Dorothy rarely thought of the fine brick library in the center of Square, back home in Massachusetts. She was far too busy in her fine little library where people loved to read and where everyone loved Miss Dorothy. Look, she's older now. Every day the mail truck brought letters from Miss Dorothy's readers, some nearby and some very far away. One of them came from Ben, now a pilot in the U.S. Air Force. He said, "You showed me the world through books, and now I have gone to see it for myself. Thank you for being a librarian." He sent a picture of him and his airplane. Another letter said, Thank you for loving books and for loving people. Although you were never in charge of a fine brick library like the one in your hometown, you are a real librarian. You have readers who love you and books you share. Thank you for bringing the world to our little door. Love, Barbara. That's the girl that she helped in the wheelchair. And look, she went to school and graduated college. The end. So what's super cool about this book is that it's a real true story. This really happened. And the author said, Dorothy Thomas was one of my heroes as a child. Her little green van with a fresh batch of books would arrive every 2 weeks at the store my family operated. During alternate weeks, she would drive into the schoolyard. I checked out new books from her every week. The rural area where I lived had no library building, but residents there were avid readers. Mrs. Thomas stored the combined library collections of Avery, Mitchell, and Yancey counties in her basement, carrying them up and down the stairs each morning and night. Many of my contemporaries from the area, including Ben Harding, James Bird, and Barbara Davenport, have told me that she was one of the brightest spots in their lives. Everyone remembers the tiny woman with great fondness and how she touched their lives, though no one living today seems to know where she is. There is no monument to her, no stone with her name on it, that is. Her memorial is the love of books she engendered in the lives of her patrons, young and old. So, Miss Dorothy was really a real person that used her love of books to share with the people in her town and her community, and it helped them reach their goals, like becoming a pilot or going to school. So even though we can't be at school, you can still read tons and tons of books. Okay? Bye. Let's find Lola. Hey, Lola. You want to say bye? Come here. There she is. Say bye, everyone. Good job.